Welcome to A Delhi Love, Ishq Mohabbat Pyar, the podcast that treats Delhiwalas to captivating conversations on living and loving all things Delhi. Delhi is not just a place, it's a state of mind, an attitude that leaves a mark on everyone who visits or calls it home. I'm Yasmin Kidwai, your host, a documentary filmmaker, former municipal councillor, and at heart, the quintessential Delhi girl. I love how Delhi is both old and new at the same time. I value its history and heritage and love exploring the new aspects of the city we share. I'm no expert, but I grew up in the gullies here, enjoyed public service here, and just like you, shared a deep passion for Delhi's enigmatic soul. Together, let's embrace the delightful contradictions that make Delhi the city it is. After all, around every corner, there must be 1,000 Dastans to share in this megacity of a million conversations. The person we are meeting today has lived many lives. She was born in Delhi, but then travelled the world for study and work. Today we know her as a designer, social activist, advocate for the preservation of India's rich cultural heritage, champion of artisans, and style icon. Laila Tyabji was born into an illustrious family that played a key role in the freedom struggle and was known to make progressive choices that were ahead of the times. Her great-grandfather, Badruddin Tyabji, was the third president of the Indian National Congress. And her parents, Badruddin and Suraya, played a vital role in the final design of the Indian national flag. After studying design in Japan, Laila returned to India and found her true calling while working with artisans in Kutch, Gujarat. Realizing that what craftspeople lacked was marketing and a connection to markets, she began working with 5 other women towards creating what would eventually become Dastkaar in 1981. Dastkaar, meaning artisan, is dedicated to revitalizing traditional Indian crafts, preserving their heritage, and providing sustainable livelihood to artisans. The organization pioneered various innovative initiatives to support artisans, like crafts fairs, craft bazaars, and skill development workshops. For most people, Laila is the face of Dastkaar. Most Delhiwalas would know about her work from the annual pilgrimage to Dastkaar in Andheriya Mode. A vocal advocate for craft preservation, fair trade, and sustainable development, Laila believes that Indian crafts should be treated as a significant economic sector since they employ a number only second to agriculture. She has received numerous awards and honors for her work, including the prestigious Padma Shri. A revered figure in both the design and social impact communities in India and abroad, she has also developed a cool quotient by embracing social media platforms like Facebook and Instagram, where she is known as much for her Sari Diaries as for her efforts to promote Indian craft. She was the OG influencer before it became cool to be one.
We didn't have a lot of the things that we have today. Telephones didn't work, long power cuts and things. But there was such an energy and excitement because it was a whole new country starting up. I mean, there were millions of craftspeople in India, there still are, but they are completely invisible and marginalized. They had this great skill, but they didn't know what to do with it because what they made for themselves was so different from what a, sophisticated young woman in Delhi or Bombay would want. You can't wrap a beautiful thing in some old newspapers and, give it to a customer. It immediately devalues it. The Indian government in the last 80 years has not done, which is promote actually the value of handmade, of something that's crafted, that's unique. I'm asked to go to NIFT or Pearl or something to give an orientation lecture. Now these are kids who are coming in because they want to be designers, but they're so ignorant. So there's always a silver lining. And in a very funny way, COVID had another effect which was very good for the craft sector. The internet has been the most amazing thing for craftspeople. The days that I get out of bed from the right side, I feel very optimistic. And I say, give another 20-25 years and India will be back to the 17th century where Indian fabrics circled the globe and were exported everywhere.
A very warm welcome, Lailaji. I don't know if you remember, but we met very, very long back. So there was a screening of a little film for the Barefoot College in, I think, I don't know, that was the Ashoka Leela. No, at the Leela.
Okay.
With Mr. Pankaj Roy. And we very, very briefly met over there.
Okay.
So that film was made by me.
Achha.
Yeah.
Oh.
So let's start at the beginning.
Okay.
You, what we call the Midnight's children, because you share your birthday with
Yes,
India,
with
the same month,
yeah,
August. And how was it growing up in the original New India?
Well, it was a very exciting time. And yes, we didn't have a lot of the things that we have today. And telephones didn't work. There were these long power cuts and things. But there was such an energy and excitement because it was a whole new country starting up. And my parents were very involved with all that. And growing up as a child, one felt a great sense of pride at being part of this new India. And my father was in the foreign service, so we were abroad. And, one felt that, yes, we were representing, and the way that we behaved or the way that we projected our country was really flying the flag for India. And we were thrilled. And I have to say that we felt in a way rather intolerant of other countries who hadn't had the same exciting journey and were not starting up or were still part of the whole colonial empire, which there were still some countries at that time. It was very, very nice. And of course, it was very informal. And everybody was starting new. And whether it was the government or whether it was the corporate sector or whether it was the private sector, NGO sector, there was hardly any at that time. But we were all experimenting, and not me, because I was a small child, but these new institutions coming up, whether it was the medical institutes, whether it was the IITs, whether it was Lalit Kala and Rabindra Bhavan and Doordarshan and all, everything was new. And people who worked in that, I think, felt this sense of excitement and also participation because you saw the result of your work and things. While now I think we've all become a little sort of negative and depressed, and, we sort of feel that things are changing, and are they changing for the worse, or what is happening? So there's a different sort of feeling in the air, which was very different from the 50s and 60s.
True. I don't think there's that sense of ownership.
Yeah, absolutely. And falsely I, of course, experienced it in a different way when we started Dastkaar, because again, we were starting something new. It was the 80s where the NGO sector was just about beginning, Tilonia, which you mentioned, the Sevas, Sasha, Dastkaar, we were all Urmuls. We were sort of discovering how to work in the sector. So that was exciting for me, and I felt that same sort of energy and little bit of apprehension, but also of excitement. So I think that human beings need that in order to feel worthwhile.
Yeah, the sense of, creating something together.
New.
Yeah. But, talking of creating, and you mentioned the flag, your parents had something to do with the design, especially your mother.
Actually, both of them. In every way, their marriage was a partnership, and in this also. People always talk about the flag, but I think more important is actually they're designing the national emblem, the sort of the lion's symbol, because the flag was already there. The tricolour was already there, the orange and the white and the green, except that it was a Congress flag and it had the spinning wheel in the middle, and which was very beloved of Gandhiji. So when India was about to become independent and things, everyone was so busy doing all kinds of things, and then there was the horror of the partition and thing, and no one really thought about this representational side of a new country. And suddenly it was, I think, just a few months before they realized this, and they started a committee in the Constituent Assembly, and my father was the secretary. And Nehru was very close to my extended family, actually, said to my father, half jokingly, that, "Oh, brother, you are very good at all these clothes and things. So why don't you look after this?" And it was a sort of three things. One was a symbol, one was a flag, and one was the national dress, which our Indian ambassadors or ministers and all wore when they went on formal occasions, because they'd obviously given up the tailcoats and black ties and all that. So there was a committee, and my father had to present ideas. And as far as the flag went, it was fairly straightforward. Nehru explained to Gandhiji that you can't have the spinning wheel because it represents the party, and the Congress party flag cannot become the national flag. So then that was the thing, and my parents were already working on the national emblem, which was the Ashoka pillar, and which was very beloved to them. They thought they were great admirers of Emperor Ashok, and they felt that the way that he transformed his nation from savage wars and things to this peaceful cultural base. So they took the lion top of the Ashoka pillar and said that should be the national emblem. And then they thought that the chakra, which is at the base of the lions, would be a perfect thing to put on the flag instead of the spinning wheel. So, and everyone on the committee, I think Rajendra Prasad was the president of that committee, and they all liked the idea very much, and they said, let's go ahead with that. And the only stumbling block was that my mother had painted the flag to show them, and she had painted the chakra black. And Gandhi said that you cannot have black on the national flag. So then it became this dark navy blue.
Okay. You also mentioned that your father worked on the dress.
Yeah, so it was decided that the achkan or bangala would be the thing, and churidars. And again, I think it was Dr. Radhakrishnan and Pant who were not very happy at these churidars, and they wanted a dhoti. And there was a lot of discussion about it, and that actually in cold countries the dhoti is not very suitable, and you have a lot of bare legs, or you have socks which don't necessarily look very good. So then it was decided to have churidars, and they were all teasing my father and said, it's very okay for you because you've got very nice legs, but what about us? So anyway, so that was decided.
So you yourself, you studied in Baroda and then you went to Japan.
Yes, I went to Vellum, boarding school in Vellum in Dehradun, and then I went to Japan after my father was posted there as ambassador. I was already studying in Baroda at the Faculty of Fine Arts. So then I continued fine arts in Japan.
And then it was during the 1960s and 70s that when you traveled to Kutch in Gujarat, that your journey with Artisans and...
Actually, that was a bit later. It was in the late 70s that I went to. When I came back from Japan, I was a freelance designer, and I was doing all kinds of things, from interiors and graphics and costumes for sets, for stage and film, and doing fashion design, because at that time as a designer you could be much more general than today where you have to specialize. So I did all kinds of assignments, from Mrs. Gandhi's stationery to doing the interior of the Akbar Hotel with Martin Singh and Reena Singh, and doing sets and costumes for Amadeus. And so I did all kinds of stuff, and I loved that. I loved working on different projects. But I gradually became, I realized that what I enjoyed was working with Indian skills and techniques and materials. I didn't really like doing an office in plexiglass and stainless steel. And I liked to work with, and I loved working with people. So although I had come back to India from Japan thinking I was going to be an artist with a capital A, I had to earn a living. So I was doing these design assignments, and then discovered that that's really what I liked doing most, was working with people and doing something which was going to be used and which was functional and part of everyday life, not just stuck on a wall somewhere. So that's started me working with crafts. And then in 1976 or 7, I was invited to go to Kutch as visiting designer for Gujarat State Handicrafts Corporation. And then that's really then tied these two things, one of working with craftspeople to make things, and also of working with craftspeople to hopefully change their lives in a more positive way.
You felt that connection immediately?
Yes. For me, Kutch was just a culmination of everything that I had thought about and was keen about. And it was just a shock in many ways to realize that these people who were so creative and so talented really worked in a very different way from the way that those of us who'd been trained in an art school or something. And when I was going to Kutch, I was going initially for 3 months. And, I'd made this little set with my mother's help with all different paints and colors and rulers and set squares and all that. But when I arrived in Kutch and squared paper, I realized that when you're working with craftspeople, they don't know how, at least at that time, they didn't know how to use all this. And they had no sense of scale. So you could do a very intricate and beautiful square drawing of a bedspread. But if you showed it to them, they couldn't relate it. And you actually had to sit down on the ground and spread out the cloth and cut the cloth and put it, because otherwise they couldn't. And in fact, in those days, late 70s, even if you showed a Rabari craftswoman a photograph of herself, she really couldn't recognize it because she had never seen herself at that size, and very often not even looked at herself in a mirror or photograph. So she couldn't relate this little image to someone who was life-size. So the whole way of working, I had to learn a whole new way of working and designing with craftspeople. And even the language, what they called different colors, how they thought of different things. It was a whole new experience, really.
Then how did Dastkaar come about? I believe 6 of you came together.
Yeah. Well, that was
the shared vision.
When I came back from Kutch, I ended up actually staying for 6 months in Kutch because it was just so wonderful. But I had to come back and my mother had passed away. So I was living with my father, wanted to be with him. And I was offered a job which was the complete opposite, actually.
At the Taj Khazana.
Yes, at Taj Khazana as their designer merchandiser. And that really brought home even more the big gap between a rural craftsperson and an urban merchandiser buyer store. Because although we wanted to keep handcrafted products in Khazana, craftspeople didn't have stock ready, they make things on order. This was because Khazana was starting. One of the provisos was that you can you can put anything you like in the store. We have total faith in your sense of...
This was the first Khazana in Delhi?
Yes, the Taj had just been built, and actually the way that they came to have the Khazana shop was also quite interesting because they had got permission to build a hotel in a part of Delhi which was not supposed to be commercial, but they had very good relationships with the powers that be. But one of the provisos was that you can't sublet any space in the store. And normally when you have a hotel in a shopping arcade, you let it out to various people. You have a carpet person and you have a chemist and bookshop, etc. But here they were not allowed to do that. And so they were going to run all the shops themselves. And when I went for my interview, I was just 30 and the usual. One is so confident and brash in those days. So when Mr. Kerkar, the chairman of Indian Hotels, said to me that, well, you've been suggested for either the sari shop or the antique shop as their buyer designer, and which would you like? And I very airily, because I wasn't sure that I really wanted this job, and I said, but if you're running them all, why do you have to have these little shops? Why not have one big, nice open space?
So the idea of the space was...
Yeah, it was also something that they hadn't thought about it because they had such a, 5-star hotel, shopping arcade, etc. So he was quite taken aback and he looked at me and he said, that's interesting. And I said, yeah, it's a lovely space, 5,000 square feet of beautiful thing. And, you have an open style thing, don't have shelves and partitions, just have it all like an exhibition. And that was before there were any other lifestyle stores in India. So it was quite a novel idea for him. And he said, oh, that sounds interesting. So if you do that, will you run it? And I said, yeah, sure. Having never ever done anything of the kind.
But the idea was yours.
And that, doing merchandising for stores is a different thing from being a designer. I knew nothing about stock, nothing about, quantities, sales, etc. But anyway, of course, I had a fabulous team and it was great fun. But the whole thing was that because, and this was to go back to where I was beginning, that because it was a new thing for the Taj to actually have to do retail, their proviso was that I can have an open ticket, I can go anywhere in India and select things, but it all has to be on consignment, sale or return, because if the experiment doesn't work, then you can just send everything back and, no profit, no loss. So, and of course, craftspeople, not only in Kutch but anywhere in India, weren't able to give things on consignment because they didn't have stock. They only worked to an order. And so there was all my darling people from Kutch whom I would love to have ordered things from, but they couldn't do it. And the Taj was not willing to put out money and advances and things.
The craftsperson.
So we managed to have a very beautiful shop. There were lots of people, small exporters, people who were doing things out of their garages and things, making nice clothes, doing all kinds of accessories and things. And we had a lovely shop, but we didn't have anything from grassroots craftspeople. So that was one of the things for me to think that, here you have craftspeople who have a wonderful skill, and here you have the urban consumer who at that time in the late 70s, early 80s, was just about beginning to look at their homes and, lifestyle and things had become a little more important, and fashion and things. And I said the two of them both need each other and would profit from each other, but how do you get them to meet? How do you explain to craftspeople what the urban consumer wants and vice versa? So that's, for me, was the seed of Dastkaar. And at that time, there were 5 or 6 people who started Dastkaar with us. And we all came together because we all were tackling the same problem, but from different angles. There was somebody who was in government who felt frustrated that here were this, whole lot of people, and how do you get them into the mainstream market? There was somebody else who'd been working in Bangladesh after Bangladesh got independence, and the Bangladeshis had very effectively used craft and textile as one of the catalysts for their empowerment and for development. So she'd gone through that whole experience and she came back to India and she said, why aren't we doing anything about our crafts? They're just deteriorating and you don't find them anywhere. And then somebody else was working with women in the slums, and where do they sell what they make? How do they? So we all approached it from different viewpoints, and we started talking, and we said that yes, what's needed is an organization that acts as a bridge between rural craftspeople and urban consumers without actually wanting to be a profit base in itself. It should be something which is non-profit, so that neither side have to pay for that thing. And that's really how Dastkaar started. It was just an idea. We all were working, we all were doing different things, but we said we'd give a few hours a week. We start working locally in Delhi and so on. And it just sort of mushroomed because it was something for which there was a real need. I mean, there were millions of craftspeople in India. There still are. It's the second largest sector of the economy after agriculture. But they are completely invisible and marginalized, and they had no idea. And sometimes, even what they had this great skill, but they didn't know what to do with it because what they made for themselves was so different from what a, sophisticated young woman in Delhi or Bombay would want. And the homes are different, the lifestyles are different. So we were an interpretation center. We were, helping with design and product development. We were doing all kinds of things. But then came the sort of thing that, okay, you work with craftspeople, you develop a very good product, but how do you sell it? Because if the craftsperson tried to, for instance, walk into the Taj Hotel and say that I've got beautiful patchwork bedspreads, I mean, that the one in the entrance with his wonderful moustaches would give him one kick and say, get out. And the minute you arrived wearing a turban and a dusty pair of jutis, you would not be accepted. The marketing manager sitting in, which I knew very well from my Dastkaar experience, you would never see them. And unfortunately, by that stage, the end of the 70s, even the institutions like the Central Cottage Industries Emporium, the Handicrafts Board, HHEC, all of them, though they had been created to help craftspeople, they had all become a little, bureaucratic and sometimes corrupt as well. So it was really difficult for even a very skilled craftsperson to get access. So that's then when we had the idea of doing these Dastkaar bazaars, where we called the craftspeople themselves and they sold.
So what came first? First came skill development
Yeah.
and design interventions, and then the bazaar scheme.
That was about a year on, because we realized that, you can say to a craftsperson that, you should use better cloth because your color runs, and however good your embroidery is, no one's going to buy it. But then you make a cushion cover maybe or a kurta, and it's more expensive than what they were normally making. And then where do they sell it? And so then they lose faith and they say, let's go back to what we were doing, because this is just costing us money, but it's not resulting in sales.
So how long did it remain, like a couple of hours a day, like you had initially thought?
Well, it wasn't very long. I think it was, there were some of us, Bunny Page, who would, this Parsi friend who'd come back from working in Bangladesh, she quite early on saw that, people were coming, people were asking. So she said, I'll commit myself to this and be the kind of coordinator of Dastkaar. And I continued doing freelance work for quite some time, actually. But yes, it was a few hours a week, maybe a day or two a week. But it very soon became clear that this was a real need. And we were getting more and more, and particularly after we did our first bazaar at Triveni Kala Sangam. Now, of course, the crafts bazaars are everywhere. But at that time, it was quite a novel idea, that the craftspeople who made the thing, they themselves were selling. And at our first bazaar at Triveni, I think we had 15 groups. And the customers coming couldn't believe. They would come to us and say, we want to buy this. And you say, she'll make your bill or whatever. And they say, she'll make the bill. And this whole idea was completely novel to them. And novel for the craftspeople also, who'd come to Delhi probably first time in their lives. We had to go and pick them up at their station with big placards. They stayed with us in our homes because they didn't know what kind of food, and they were so fussy. The Bengalis wanted certain type of rice, and the ones from Gujarat wanted different type of roti. It was quite a nightmare, actually, but fun also. And then it was cold because I don't know, it was January or February or something, and they were feeling so cold and they were initially quite miserable. But then when they were actually receiving that money and people were coming and looking at their things and saying how beautiful, and then that bit they loved, because it was the first time that they had that kind of interaction with urban people. Now, of course, they've become so routine. They go all over the world and they joke a lot actually about customers and compare what Bangalore customers and Delhi customers and things like that. And the thing they can't get over is actually the clothes that we wear. And I remember this lady from, I think she was a Soda Rajput from Rajasthan, and she was a twinkle in her eye when I had brought a couple of the Dastkaar staff when we were working there. And she said, I thought people in the city were very rich, but actually you seem to be very poor because you wear such torn clothes. And why is, and they don't even think, because these kids, with their ripped jeans and their t-shirts, which was considered very stylish by them. But for these women, it was true, because they, even in the Kutch desert, where they have to walk about 1.5 miles to get a bucket of water, even then they're always immaculate with their beautiful clothes and embroideries and their bangles here and their little hair clips. So they couldn't understand why people who could afford to wear nice clothes wore these miserable rags. And then the other thing that is also always hilarious for people who come to the bazaar first time, and they say, why do you all greet each other by saying hi, hi?
But it's true, because when I spent time in Telonia,
I learned to say namaste, and they would all say it in such a greeting, and there was no concept of anybody passing anybody, even a stranger, without saying. That was a huge learning, because we do become so indifferent.
Absolutely true. And I think you have such a lot that you can learn. I mean, I think I have learned much more than I have taught in all these years, because there is a kind of intrinsic homegrown wisdom that they have about living in very, very difficult circumstances and how they manage to convert that. And so I feel that I've been so lucky that, yes, I'm not at all denying that it's very nice to have a comfortable home and have had a great education and a wonderful life. But you also see the other side, that how much of what you think is necessary is quite unnecessary. And you can lead a beautiful, fun, happy life without all that. So I like that I have a foot in both.
But tell me, today you and Dastkaar are indistinguishable. How involved are the others now?
From our original 5, actually 2 have unfortunately passed away. And one, Jaya Jetli, of course, went into politics, and she left, and then she started her own organization. And the other 2 are still part of, they're on our board, and they're very involved in what we do, but they have their own lives. One is specializing in women's thing, and Poonam Mutreja looks up as the Population Foundation head. So they give advice and things, but they're not involved in a day-to-day basis. And I was also not, until Bunny Page left to go back to the UK, because her sons were studying there. And then I said, okay, I come in as full-time.
So, you had mentioned that, post-independence, there was a conscious effort. That's why to revive craft. That's why perhaps there's been cottage industry and all. But these spaces were created. But what was the reason that the craftsmen were not getting? Was it because of a lack of vision or bureaucratic hassles, or?
I think it was a whole lot of things, because the whole independence movement and India in its early years was very influenced by not only Gandhi's vision of India, but also people like Kamla Devi Chattopadhyay and many others who were part of that whole thing. So those institutions were set up, but because everything was so informal, and people who were working then, whether it was Kamala Devi or Popul Jaikar or L.C. Jain or all the people who contributed to it, were all working on a voluntary basis. And because at that time it seemed so natural that you give everything you have and your vision, and if you are economically okay, you can afford to do that. So these institutions were set up without perhaps rigorously working out the kind of management system and things. There were, in any case, no management consultants. There were no kind of, people to guide. So they came out sort of thinking that everyone who's going to be involved in this is going to be doing it for love, and that also they already have a certain understanding and knowledge. But actually, you need to train people. I mean, you had a wonderful thing like cottage industries, and you had Prem Berry, who had the most exquisite taste and refinement, and she got all the buyers at that time were the wives of people who were either in the services or in, the IAS and so on. And they had great taste, and they also, they were their core audience, so they knew what people would like. But then they didn't think that they then have to train the next generation of people who were coming in and were going to need salaries and so on. But they also needed training to recognize powerloom from handloom, what was good weaving, what was the... And so all of these institutions sort of gradually became, when that core person went, then you were left with a sort of people they were bureaucrats or they were salespeople or whatever, who didn't have either understanding or particular commitment. And it became much easier, and it was obviously there was corruption also in the whole, because if a craftsperson came, the buyer would ask for a certain percentage. If I give you an order, then you have to give. So it gradually became like, and now if you look at all the emporiums on Baba Khadak Singh Marg, I mean, I shouldn't generalize, but most of them have gone back to that consignment from vendors and middlemen, where you're just taking things. There's very little
curation also, I find.
Very little curation, very little product development. I mean, cottage industries used to have a wonderful cell of 4 designers who worked on different things. They had they had someone who was trained in exhibition design to set up the thing. They used to do these beautiful displays and all that. But there was no long-term vision. I think that was really the trouble.
It kind of keeps, there's no consistency even with cottage industries. But coming back to Dastkaar, the markets, of course, are almost revolutionary, the bazaars where they've been all over India. But what kind of design interventions and skill, entrepreneurial development did you have to do?
Well, not only had to do, but still are. It's really like an iceberg that everyone sees the bazaars because they're the visible side, and they're colorful. And that's what lots of people, even people whom I know very well, think that that's what I do, I organize.
And that's the only thing that you do. Yes.
That I organize these bazaars. Actually, I now have hardly anything to do with the bazaar. But it is about skilling, it's about entrepreneurial training, it's about product development and design. We do workshops, we do trainings all over with our craftspeople. And we also develop things specifically for orders, because Dastkaar also has to make some money. And we really, from the craftspeople themselves, we only take a very small percentage to cover the actual cost of the stall and the publicity and so on. So for Dastkaar itself, we do consultancies. We advise people who want to do craft development. We also do product design. For instance, we've just done a whole range. The Aga Khan Foundation is starting a shop now in the Sundarnagar nursery. So they asked us to work with, I think, 8 different crafts and develop products which I hope you'll see by the end of the year.
I've worked a little bit in that zone because that was the part of my constituency. So I have got involved with the women fund, the cultural fund only, and so the little embroidery skills and I worked with them a little bit on. My input was limited in that sense, but with Zardozi and even with the cooking self, they have like the
yes, that's very nice because that's for all the women in Nizamuddin Basti.
Yes.
We were working with craftspeople all over India to develop products which were inspired by Humayun's tomb. And the motifs and the architecture.
And the very limited symbols over there. Try to look at that. But that how wonderful, I think.
So we've done with dhokra, with marble.
We had Ratish Nanda for one of the first episodes we did. So I know a lot about that area.
Well, he's done the most wonderful work.
Yes. I'm really happy that this intervention is being done by Dastkaar because I've so long felt that, how can we help? How can we push this? This is the best, I think, that they could.
So the brief was to really have things which are sort of inspired by that period as well as by the architecture and the motifs.
And what can we hope to see in terms of?
Everything from jewelry to sort of home accessories. The works.
Okay, lovely. Yeah. Another thing that, I feel that there's another side of the problem also, that the craft be recognized as art.
Yeah.
As a skill in the first place, and the artist's effort should be recognized.
Absolutely.
So how do you work on this side, the customer side for that?
Well, that's a big challenge because, let's be quite clear that craft is a huge sector and it's very varied. So you have things from, the high end of craftspeople who build temples and do wonderful sculptures and things like that and paintings. And then you have the ornamental but still functional products, which are things that you use, whether it's boxes or vases or, toys and things like that. And then you have the absolute utilitarian craft, which is still completely handmade, but it's something that is made in multiple numbers and looks, it's supposed to look exactly each piece the same. So, and we take all these three categories and we lump them together and say this is Indian craft. And most of them fall out of the basket because if you're having a lifestyle store, you're having a craft emporium on Baba Kharit Singh Mug, you're not going to put jarus and baskets. And you're also not going to put, huge twice lifestyle murtis.
Can be made of order,
So you have a lot of things which don't fit into the sort of generic thing of craft for tourism or crafts for the Aam Janta. And they don't know where to sell it and people don't know where to buy it and or even order it. So actually, Dastkaar's attempt is not just to promote the craftspeople who come to our bazaars, who are more or less the middle area, who make decorative but utilitarian, who make clothes or who make household accessories or things, toys and folk art and things, and then to try and get orders for the other two categories of people. And so I actually think that given that we have, 200 million people working in the craft sector, we should now start looking at it as separate, not just lumping it together. And there's no reason that, all furniture should only be sold in a craft emporium. It doesn't actually, it requires a lot of space and things. So maybe, you should encourage special furniture shops which sell crafted things and all that. It's a huge thing, and it's not really realistic to think that either the government of India or small NGOs like Dastkaar and Sasha and Seva can cope with this. It has to be looked at in a very professional way. And craftspeople are professionals, they're skilled professionals. But we never look at them like that when we're doing our planning or our budget allocations and things, we just think of them as this lump, and we think that by giving them some subsidy or giving them some scheme, we are dealing with it. We have to look at them just as we look at any other part of the sector.
What would that require?
It requires a lot of very strategically placed funds where you have things where craftspeople can get credit to buy raw material, to set up workshops, to buy proper kind of equipment and things, that they don't have to sit on the floor whittling and, have to keep buying every time they want to make something. They have to rush out into the mainstream market to buy their cloth or whatever. And so to have proper things, just distribution of raw material centers where people can buy seasoned wood, where they can buy cotton, where they don't have to buy cotton which is made for the mill sector, but the appropriate local cotton which is there. There needs to be a lot of investment in raw material, in storage facilities, and all the ancillary things that go around craft. Because, for instance, you have lots and lots, practically every state in India has people who do wonderful embroidery or weaving. I mean, we know about, not every state, but practically every little district has its own distinctive thing. But those people are not thought of as being little powerhouses which could generate a lot of ancillary employment
around them.
Because if you had, say, a dyeing center or a dry cleaning or packaging, all the things that they need, instead of every weaver's family doing their own dyeing, doing their own washing.
Yeah, they can work.
But clusters which really have the facilities that craftspeople need, while keeping in consideration that every craftsperson has an individual skill and actually wants to hold on to that skill. They don't want to be merged into a kind of factory production unit where they all are churning out the same stuff. And so I think we need to examine it. I think it's because bureaucrats and planners are sitting in their AC office in Delhi without any idea of how actually a craft cluster should work, used to work, and what can be done to make.
Yes, I think with a macro approach, some micro sustainable efforts at every state and with block.
Absolutely, they're so different. The way that craft people work. I always tell my Dastkaar staff when they're going off on a field trip that listen not just with your ears but with your head and your heart, because until then you will never understand. Because craft people are they're much nicer and more polite than we are. So when someone comes and visits them, they will not begin saying how we should do something. They are, accepting whatever we do for them with more gratitude than I think we deserve. And they won't say that, this doesn't work for us, or it's wonderful that the government has schemes for us to go to trade fairs internationally, but unless we have this well in advance, it doesn't work. We have a good, jamboree and fun trip, but it does not result in trade in the way it does. And that would you do this if you had a startup industry? Would your first step be to send them to a trade fair? Not at all. There's at least 2-3 years of investment in infrastructure, in skilling, and market surveys.
Supply
all
chains
that.
are also which we look at in every other industry.
So, it's something that, in a minuscule way, Dastkaar follows these practices, but one feels frustrated sometimes that it's not done on a larger scale, and that when it is done strategically and step by step and in a holistic way, that what a craft group needs is not just a market. They need the ability to understand the market and make something suited to the market. It is very successful and very cost effective. You have projects like Seva Lucknow or Berozgar Mahila Samiti in Bihar, which started with 12 or 13 women who were completely penniless, literally, and were earning a pittance for their work from traders. And today they are selling in crores. Their annual turnovers in crores. So if you look at those modules and just blow them up a little, and say, why did it work? It worked because someone studied the craft, studied the community, and saw how did this grow from 12 to say 12,000 women.
So interventions definitely need to be more community based and specific to the needs.
Yeah, absolutely. Specific is the thing, because everyone works in a different way. I mean, when I go to Bihar to work with Sujni embroiderers in Barheta, we start work at about 12 o'clock in the day, because before that the women like to cook, they like to clean their house, they send their kids off, they do everything, they pray, and then they have their baths and the thing, and then they come, and then we work sometimes till 11 or 12 at night, because they've done everything and they're peaceful. In other places, you actually start very early in the morning, because they prefer to finish off their work with us and then go home and do, work in the field or whatever.
So this is something which comes from the community.
Yeah, from observing them and their lifestyle and their work and their needs. And you have to shape yourself to suit them. And I just think that there's so much that can be done, and this whole sector is a gold mine for India, because we have these skills and crafts that no other country in the world has in such quantities and such living practitioners, but we just don't do it. We take this lump generic thing, oh, there's craft sector, there's so many million people, they're working in remote areas, this is a very primitive thing when India is industrializing, so for this generation we have to subsidize and keep them okay, and then we gradually shift them. And when you say, but don't you see that rural migration has already done so much harm to India? Our cities are groaning the infrastructure. We don't have, every road is sort of jam-packed. We don't have enough water. We don't have enough electricity. We don't have enough hospitals and schools to cater to them. If the whole of rural India, which is 75%, suddenly now start coming here.
No, but that's it requires it requires a very holistic approach.
Yeah.
You have a very interesting case study in Ranthambore, where the intervention and it went from a very small cluster to an example. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Ranthambore initiative?
Well, Ranthambore is one of my cherished babies. I'm not supposed to have favorites among our projects, but that certainly is one of them, because unlike most of the places where Dastkaar has been working, there was no living craft, I mean, with Seva Lucknow, there were 45,000 chicken workers there. The fact that they were earning pittance was the problem, and to get them a better market and do new design. But in Ranthambore, there was nothing. They were all totally agrarian community. They were herders, and they got their fodder and their thing from the forest. And so when Ranthambore was the sanctuary was started, the Ranthambore Park, a lot of people who even go there to enjoy seeing those magnificent tigers don't know that 17 villages were taken out of the park area and literally dumped. I mean, some bureaucrat must have looked at a map of Savai Madhopur district and said, "Hey, yahan khali hai, kuch nahi hai, chalo unko wahan resettle karo." And so when they were shifted like that, and they were not allowed to go into the park, even the villages which were on the outside of the park were not allowed to enter in to get fodder or to allow their herds to get water from the little lakes that are in the park area. They just didn't know what to do, and they were completely isolated. And so Valmik Thapar, who, Tiger Man, who was a great friend of mine, he said that please go to Ranthambore and do something for these women, because there's so much unhappiness and poverty in the villages, and there's also a lot of resentment, and we are nervous that they might actually, turn against this whole park. So I and one of my colleagues, we went down and we followed the practice which we usually do when we start a project of going and seeing and doing a kind of field survey. And we went to villages. We'd asked the sarpanches to get the women and so that we could speak to them. And they were absolutely angry and sort of thing. And they said, I remember this one woman who came and said, "Fill my belly before you start talking to me about doing something." And others were saying, you ask us about whether we make anything with our hands, and look at our hands. I mean, we work in the fields, we work with things. Do they look as if we can do embroidery? So we went back 2 or 3 times. I did in the early trip, actually, I did what I would hate somebody to do to me, which is to dive into their home and, look under their beds and pull out stuff, because I think that's a shocking way to behave. But I knew from my experience that a community that was so poor had to make things with their hands because they couldn't afford to buy it. And they must.
I asked you, why did you think that, you can introduce craft where there is no craft?
So that they always is, that human nature is like that. And of course one found there was, someone had made a toy out of some straw and with a little rag. Somebody, they were all had on their beds little chadars of patchwork of little torn cloth stitched together. There was baskets. There was quite a thriving little leather community because animals die, and what do you do with their hides? So they made pretty crude but footwear, jutis and so on for themselves. They had the thing that they put on their heads, to carry their lotas, which were quite beautiful and intricately plaited. So there was quite a lot of stuff which they themselves didn't recognize as being a skill, And they were amazed that we looked at all this and we thought it had potential. But then came the second hurdle that when we said, "Oh, we really like this little doll that you have made. Can you make us some more, but use the cloth that we'll give you rather than some old piece of cloth, and, keep the colors like this?" And after 3 weeks, when we went back, nobody had done anything because they just didn't believe. They thought we were some lunatics, or some government officials, basically the same thing. And that we would never return, and, they weren't going to waste their time doing something for us. So it all seemed pretty bleak. And after 2 or 3 village visits like that, I decided that I just have to come and live there for a little while so that they would recognize that I was serious. So I took a little room in one of the villages, and it was about the size actually of this. And so I just settled down there, and I do a lot of embroidery and I know how to. So I'd taken all that, and I'd taken photographs, sort of biggish blow-ups of photographs of some of our Dastkaar crafts groups. And so obviously they were very curious to know what this batty woman from Delhi, what is she doing, sitting and living in our
What would you do? How did you start off? What would you do all day?
I used to sit and I used to sew. I'd taken everything because I knew that they did patchwork. I mean, cobbled together all ragged pieces of cloth. So I thought that patchwork was something that we could start. And I bought from Savai Madhopur town some very beautiful traditional cheese materials in lovely colors and little flower prints and so on. And so they all came in, about 4 or 5 women, and they said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm making a cushion cover. Would you like to make it? Help me." So I gave them these squares. And they were at that level where they couldn't even do a sequence of understanding that, okay, you have red, green, yellow, and then the red comes again, and then the green and the yellow. Because that was not, they just used to randomly. So training them in that, and their stitches were, huge and crooked. But at the end of the day, then I would give them 10 rupees or 15 rupees or something. I mean, this was in 1989. And they'd say, what is this? And I said, well, you made a cushion cover. Not that that cushion cover was going to ever be something we could sell, but still. And that then sort of started a thing that, my God, this lady can show us something that we can earn money.
How long were you there?
Well, that first trip, I was there, I think, for about 3 weeks. But then I used to keep going back and staying for a week or so. And I used to tell them stories that, see, that's Gendi Lal. And, he started off making little kullas at the station. And now he's making these big pots, which are in all the hotels, and etc., etc. So that gave them a kind of feeling of things. So after the first 3 weeks, we actually had a pile of, we had some jutis, we had these patchwork quilts, we had some skirts and with sequins, we had the pomchas, which were the very tie-dyed dupattas with sequins on them and so on. So all from the skills that they had, things that they did, but slightly elevated and designed. And because we had our Dastkaar shop in Hauska's village, we were able to put these things there with just a kind of 5% markup. So they were really cheap. And they sold because they were colorful, they were different, they had a story, And so at the end, when I went back again, I was able to take, I think, about 26,000 rupees or something, which we then distributed. And that really started the wheel coming.
Motivation.
And then the next thing was to get them to come to Delhi to sell themselves, which was a huge effort, and I had to convince all the guys, their husbands and their fathers.
To be a part of the
yeah. And so, but they came and they loved it, and then we took them to Lajpat Nagar and they bought all kinds of junk, and it was an adventure, and they saw that nothing had happened to them, and they got a lot of praise and a lot of photographs taken. So they went back and told their husbands and fathers. So then after that, and that is something that happens with every project. They will all say, oh, we'll work our fingers to the bone, we'll do everything, but we can't come to Delhi or Bombay and travel. And what will we do with our children? And what will we do? And ye wo. And our women never go out. And whether this is Burkha women from Lucknow or whether it's Rajasthani women from Ranthambore, this story you have to hear each time. But once they take that first step, then they're okay. And in fact,
But tell me something. Why do you feel it is so important for the craftsperson to come themselves and sell it in these bazaars?
My God, that's the huge learning, because it's not only the kind of empowerment of selling something you've made to your own customer and then seeing them come the next day wearing it or, showing it off and talking to them, which gives you this great feeling. But it's such a education, because until you come to a bazaar and interact with people, you don't realize what they want, how important something like size or color or finishing is, and things that Dastkaar staff keep telling them in the early workshops, like, this cushion cover is not a square, and you'll have this Kutchi woman who's done this extraordinary embroidery on the front of the cushion. Will say, how silly you're going to sit on it. What difference does it make if it's half an inch here or 1 inch there? And then she'll come to the bazaar and she'll see a customer picking it up and say, oh, lovely, beautiful. And then say, oh, but ye tera hai, And the tube light will go on and say, Dastkaar wale itne buddhu nahi hai.
You mentioned something that the Ranthambore story is also what intrigued people. How important is it to have a story, and how important is storytelling to marketing? And
I think it's a huge thing. Both ends of the spectrum. The story is important. it's not enough to sell a bad product, but it certainly enhances and adds value to a good product if it has a story. And then the other side, which again is very difficult for craftspeople or even for NGOs like Dastkaar, is the packaging and presentation. Today you can't, the market has become more sophisticated. You can't wrap a beautiful thing in some old newspapers and, give it to a customer. It immediately devalues it. And they say, and that's when they start bargaining, because they say that if you don't respect your thing enough to package it nicely and look after it, then why should I? And that is, I think, the difference between, that is why craftspeople will never be in the fancy malls, at least in my lifetime, because they can't afford these other add-ons, which in a way is rather sad, that you have to sell your thing by actually improving the external wrapping, which is going to be thrown away probably, the minute, and that actually when you buy something today, a huge amount of the cost of that item goes in all this, or in promoting it and all. But that's the world we live in, and I don't think you can disregard it.
Yeah, but coming to the cost factor of it, there is this sense that handcrafted or crafts are perceived by many to be very expensive, and they don't want to pay the value or this thing of it. Why is that perception there? Because I can understand one reason is maybe the packaging, so they want to bargain, but they don't even consider the value of what it is.
They don't, because one is it's just as how many of us value the Qutub Minar because it's always been there, and we pass it every day, and it doesn't cost us anything. And if somebody actually started making you pay just to look at it, you would get very angry. So in the same way, crafts have been there for a couple of 1,000 years. You remember that, you had it in your grandmother's house and it used to cost X amount. And now you're seeing it and the person is asking. I get very angry and I see that, a beautifully hand-embroidered pair of juttis is costs today, I think, about 750 rupees or something. And people will say, oh, it's so expensive. And then they'll go and buy a Adidas or Nike pair of, a lump of rubber, literally, for 5,000 or 6,000 rupees.
Yeah, more than that. Yeah.
And they won't blink. And it's come out of a assembly line in a machine, which, one shoe every second or something. But they'll think that's okay, and this is not. But you have to create that awareness, and that's the whole thing also that this government, not this government, but the Indian government in the last 80 years has not done, which is promote actually the value of handmade, of something that's crafted, that's unique. Because they do it the ulta way. Their way of selling craft is to say, oh, it's been made by a very poor person, do your good deed by buying X or Y. Instead of saying that this is something that is unique to India,
And despite many such schemes, you're right that the value of the product has to
be. And you say that, can you imagine you're buying this sari and there are probably only 6 more saris like this in the world.
Yes, yeah. And what a unique thing to own.
And how fantastic. Instead of going into Zara and buying something which is produced in thousands and then is junked because it becomes irrelevant at the end of the season.
But coming to this, the concept of ethical consumption in fashion, we are now talking of sustainable fashion and consumerism and thinking and then buying. But how does this work when it comes to handloom? Like, I am guilty of that. I feel I put all these rules on myself. Last year I went through this entire period. I started wearing saris only during after COVID because I was in touch with craftsmen and they would approach and I would okay. So I started buying and then I was like, I have this, I must wear them. Then last year I went on this purging thing. I was like, I will not buy anything, no new piece of clothing for a year. And then this year I was like, no, but I'll buy handloom. So I was myself very conflicted. I don't know how does it come to, how can we be ethically consume
we
handloom?
are very, very lucky because we can justify all our extravagance by saying, oh, I'm helping a poor weaver from Bihar.
But I do feel like not helping. But
what would they do without us? I mean, they actually require us. I mean, their market is shrinking. So it's very important that we do it, and we are part of the promotion. I mean, I love it that thanks to my Facebook Sari stories, that a lot of young people come, and we have to remember, at least I have to remember, that in my generation, my grandmother and my mother and I all wore saris. But this generation, a lot of their mothers didn't wear. So they are not in the habit of seeing saris or understanding. So this young girl, will arrive and say, oh, ma'am, I read your post and I saw and lovely and I want to buy a sari. Will you help me? And then you take them to Salahuddin and show stall, and she sees that she's completely blown because she's seeing maybe about 300 saris, each one absolutely different in color, in design, in motive. And she's used to going to a shop with store and seeing, a rack which has the same thing but in 3 sizes and 3 colors, and she makes her choice. Here she's bewildered, so guiding them through that, telling them that, this is so extraordinary, this is what we have. I mean, come on, even I love it. And I'm asked to go to NIFT or Pearl or something to give an orientation lecture. Now, these are kids who are coming in because they want to be designers. But they're so ignorant of what is available and things. And I can see them when I walk into that room and they say, oh my God, this white-haired old lady is going to come to talk us about handicraft. This is going to be so boring, And then I switch on my PPT and I show them slides of, colors and textures and designs and whatever. And I said, this is the raw material which you are going to use to make a name for yourself internationally because nobody else has it. At the moment, people come from Paris and Milan and they all have their little pet craftspeople and they go and get the stuff woven and then they make these collections. But this is for you. This is your access, And then they suddenly become, and then afterwards they come, ma'am, can we come and intern? Ma'am, where did that come from? And
but there's this huge global shift towards eco-friendly and sustainable fashion, and I know we are lucky that we can have this, access and use the craft sector to.
I think I sort of feel the days that I get out of bed from the right side, I feel very optimistic, and I say, give another 20-25 years. And India will be back to the 17th century where Indian fabrics circled the globe and were exported everywhere because nobody else has, and people are starting to think and getting out of that sort of lemming mode of following and all wearing the same things, etc. But there are days when I get out from the wrong side of my bed and I feel very depressed and I say, even when the demand will come, will we still have any craftspeople left?
Because, that's what I realized in COVID, that with artists also, musicians, and with craftsmen, once he sells off his loom or something, there's no coming back. I mean, COVID was a very, very, very dangerous time, and I'm sure it affected the craft industry.
It affected them hugely, but there's always a silver lining. And in a very funny way, COVID had another effect which was very good for the craft sector. And that was that otherwise young people, I mean, this generation coming from crafts families were all leaving and they were coming to the city and they said, oh, our lives are going to change. Here we have no status. We're making this stuff, But then after COVID, in the first year of COVID, you remember we were all seeing these streams of migrant workers going back from the cities to their villages. Absolutely. I mean, it was a harrowing sight. And when these people arrived in the villages, the people who were in the villages suddenly realized that, my God, these cities are not such great places. and you can lose your job overnight and be left with nothing. So maybe the fact that we have skills in our hands and we have an occupation which we can practice in our own homes and earn from is actually a very good thing. And so there was a certain amount of reverse thinking. And today, in many parts of India, there are people young people who are realizing that there is potential in hanging on to your craft. And they were the quickest to perhaps revive, because during COVID, helped by, we had an artisan relief fund. We were sending them money and raw material, etc., and doing design on over WhatsApp, etc. And then they had stocks. They were able to build up stock, which didn't cost them that much money because it was, craft, the raw materials and things are usually locally available. The skill is there. So they were able to reorganize bazaars and exhibitions immediately. In
the little windows,
which opened up, and they were able to recoup. So there's a realization today that actually to have a family tradition of a skill is not such a bad fallback.
And with these, you yourself have had a very successful innings on social media with your Sari Diaries. How in these platforms also would have helped craftsmen?
The internet has been the most amazing thing for craftspeople. Of course, during COVID, but even before that, because for the first time, they have direct access to their buyers, whether they are sitting in New York or they're sitting in Tokyo. They can actually talk to them, sites like Pinterest, etc. They can see what other people are making, what kind of trends are happening. They can follow fashion shows and designers and so on. So it's really been a window for them. It hasn't yet become a huge selling opportunity, because the whole business of online buying and selling is actually quite complex and costs quite a lot of money to get yourself promoted and have a site that people click on, and then the whole packaging and shipping and all that. It's not easy. Even for us, we started during COVID.
You also have an online
we have an online division, but it's quite difficult to do, and it sounds as if it's going to be very simple and cheap to put some photographs up, but there's a lot that goes into it and a lot of investment. But for craftspeople, as a means of communication, as a way of learning and awareness and things, it's been fantastic, and they've become quite savvy. When we started this during COVID, I mean, it was such an effort. We used to sort of phone them and say, okay, now please send us a photograph of whatever you're making and thing. And they would send you this photograph, this absolutely beautiful thing. And then there'd be a pair of chaddis on a line hanging behind, so that you had to say, no, you have to have a background, you have to do this. But now they've become really quite savvy, and they all have their little brand names. And
I have a lot of people sending me DMs. It's lovely. But the online does have its challenges. I feel that because when somebody orders, and I think that the customer has to become sensitized, there would be
a variation.
And it would be it's very upsetting when somebody wants to return it.
And then there's this time lag, because as I said, craftspeople don't keep ready stock. So someone might see something, by the time the order comes, that particular shade of cloth may not be available, or they're not making such a thing. It's quite complex. And then you have to, the main thing is actually that there's so many competitors outside in the world. So to get your things clicked on, to have someone who's actually looking for it, and what hashtag you put and all that is quite complex.
Always quite learn. Before this you were mentioning that our mothers have not worn, that we haven't seen our mothers wearing saris, and I must say that
that when I chose to wear a sari, my mother was extremely surprised. Almost like, why would you do that? Why would you put yourself? And I felt that, perhaps for her, one of the biggest acts of rebellion or this thing was not to wear the sari, that I'm not going to wear it anymore, you know. It was a fuss. And so she found it very difficult that I'm choosing to like regularly wear them, and you know, I don't find it fussy because I mean, I don't look at the perfection of it, so I'm quite okay. But I think perhaps that was the only form of rebellion that she's done. You, on the other hand, have, you know, lived a very unconventional life from that point of view. How was it saying no to marriage and all in a time when society completely defines women by it?
I think that, you know, whether it's this whole marriage thing or profession or direction, I have always been a person who's lived each day as it comes. I've not been a great planner. People always ask, you know, even the Dastkaar story, they long to hear a nice, you know, that we had a vision and there was a linear path, and here we are today working with so many lakh craftspeople all over India.
I'm very happy to hear you say that, because I often kind of feel that where am I going? What am I doing?
I was a person who was operated purely by impulse, and because I was fortunate enough, I mean, I could take my own choices. My father always said to me, to all of us, all four of us, that I don't care what you do in life as long as you do it with passion and you do it with pleasure.
And there you haven't lacked.
I haven't lacked. And that has always been the jhanda that I have looked to decide whether I want to do X or Y. And as far as marriage goes, quite honestly, initially I thought, like every girl, that this is something that will happen inevitably.
It happens to everyone,
But at the moment I'm having a lot of fun, so I don't particularly want to settle down. And also I had this example of my parents' marriage, which was so wonderful that
nothing, you mentioned in the beginning, nothing could actually compare,
matched to that. And so I was very happily toddled about without thinking about it. Yes, I didn't find anybody whom I wanted to particularly spend my life with. I sort of, because I was leading this rather unconventional life where I was doing projects all over India, traveling a lot, sometimes internationally as well, working with all kinds of people, unconventional hours, etc. It didn't seem to fit into the framework of whatever relationship one was in at the moment. And you know, I don't know what it's like now, but at that time, certainly Indian men had a very conventional idea of what they wanted in a marriage. So while they might find that interesting in their girlfriend, it didn't quite fit into when, you know, what you wanted.
I think Indian men are still there. Indian women are more evolving quickly
anyway,
now.
I didn't find anyone who I could contemplate this long term. And I always used to say that, you know, what I really want is a lover who lives down the lane. That would be so much nicer, where you could have a choice of
their own houses and have a choice of.
But so anyway, but I've never felt actually particularly, you know, that I've missed out on anything or whatever. And lovely things, lovely relationships. Every relationship doesn't have to be a husband and a family. I have surrogate families all over India wherever I've worked and traveled. And the whole thing of children, which seem to be one of the things that people do get married, women particularly, I was frankly very nervous about it. Because I was that, you know, supposing you have a child and they're really a bit dumb, or they don't have a sense of humor, you know, what will you do? Because I could not imagine life like that. And, you know, husband you can at a pinch get rid of, but a child you really can't. And my mother used to keep saying to me that actually having a child is the most fulfilling, creative thing, and you're a creative person. Even if you don't want to get married, why don't you have a child? But I funked it, I thought. And then suddenly I got a ready-made daughter in my lap, and it's wonderful.
Wanted to ask you is about the perception of Muslim women. Like I always get asked that oh, but you don't look like a Muslim, and then I'm asked, are you Parsi? Have you also faced that?
Oh God, you know. But I think it is people just can't believe they've been so fed this stereotype of this Muslim woman, somebody in a burqa with about 7 children, trailing behind her, that they cannot visualize that anyone is different. But I think the point is that actually the Muslim community, just like every other community in the world, is different at many levels. No one is exactly the same as the other.
As much as region, language,
yeah, exactly. So you have, I get, and I don't like being taken as either the antithesis of a Muslim woman or as a typical modern Muslim woman, because I'm neither. I am me. Being Muslim, I don't even think about it. It's what I am. Whether it's in the our lifestyle, our language, our food, the way it is. I am a Muslim. It's part of my identity, but it's one part of it. It's not the whole. But it is very irritating, and I think today we've all become very self-conscious about it. And I think it's very annoying that when a Muslim misbehaves or does something savage or cruel or stupid, that you almost feel as if it's your fault. You read something in the paper and people say, that they're like that not because they're wicked or fanatic or whatever, but because they're Muslim, and people think that everyone is like that. And then you have to kind of explain it to everybody that this is one person. Don't you know hundreds of others who are not like this? And, but particularly in the world of today, I'm afraid, Islam does have a rather bad image. And as a result, Muslims have a bad image. And I think that, I suppose we have to lump it and not let it get on top of us. I had this thing, I was asked to go and speak at one of Delhi's leading women's colleges. I won't name which one it is. And they were having something, and they said, we are doing something to create awareness and whatever. So will you come and talk about Muslim women? And I said, I won't talk about Muslim women because frankly, I don't know enough about it. But I'll talk about what it's like being a Muslim woman, because I do know. So they said, okay. And so such and such a date, such and such a time, someone will be waiting at the gate to pick you up and bring you in and so on. So I went. That time I was still driving my own car. So I drove there and I got out the gate. Nobody seemed to be, waiting or doing anything, taking any notice. So I walked into the college, which I knew fairly well. And when I arrived there, the principal said, oh, how have you come and where are the girls and all that? So she called 2 girls who were supposed to be looking after me. And they came and said, oh, but when she came, she was driving her car and she had short hair. We didn't realize that this was the person because she doesn't look like...
Come and talk on Muslim women.
She doesn't look like a Muslim. What does a Muslim look like, It's a occupational hazard.
I used to have a favorite line in college. I would say, yeah, today I forgot to put my horns on to identify. But, I have to tell you this little story. You were talking that, you go and speak in schools and colleges and, you don't know how they're reacting. But you've been to my children's school in Delhi. And I have to tell you that they came back and told me, and that this craft lady came. But after that, a couple of times they've spotted the Ranthambore tiger. And they wanted that particular shirt and this thing. And, there is a lot more this thing. One positive thing, and I don't know, of course, I'm not a mall person, and I think it's also come after listening to you, is that they want to go into these, boutique craft shops like Fab India and Anoki and all to buy for themselves rather than going off into Zara or something.
That's
so
very
I
nice
kind of, I think it is, you should know because you've dedicated your life to this. But Lailaji, thank you so much. It was really, really wonderful having you. I've been admiring your sari from, of course, from here. But it's such a wonderful thing, like you said, that when we buy handloom, we can feel so good about ourselves because we are contributing to something, and it's also a chance to own almost a piece of art.
Yeah, a piece of art and a story. The story of the person who's made it, how is it? It's like I wrote recently a piece on saris where I said that this idea, I don't know whether it's true or not, but as part of this whole wedding, Ambani wedding, there was a thing that the Ambani ladies never wear sari twice. They give it away. And so I said that in a way that's so sad, because a sari has so much history with it, and if you are wearing a sari which even your mother wore, your grandmother wore, or even if you bought it from a weaver whom you know and you know where it's come from and what, so, and then to build your own memories around that piece of cloth, I think it's rather sad. I'm sure the people who get the saris are delighted, but it seems a sad thing that a sari should just become a strip of cloth that you wrap around for one evening. And
but here's to more art in all our lives, and I hope that the work that you are doing, it can, you can do more and more with it. And I have to come to Dastkaar very, very soon to the bazaar.
Yes, you must.
Thank you so much for being on A Delhi Love.
There's so much of talk of social inclusion and promoting cultural diversity by creating economic opportunities. When we buy and wear handloom or purchase Indian craft, we can do just that and gift ourselves these beautiful and unique creations. Join us next time as we explore Delhi's hidden gems, people, places and stories on Delhi Love, Ishq, Mohabbat, Pyar. I'm Yasmin Kidwai. Until next time.